We'll then invite Jeremy up, and we'll have a presentation focusing on supports and allies in the UPR process, looking at regional consultations. So I'd like to welcome Jeremy Smith. Thank you. Here you go. You can sit right here if you want. I know it's higher.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeremy. I work at the Geneva office of the Cairo Institute for Human Rights Studies. And we are, despite our name, which sounds misleading, we are a regional organization working on most countries within the Middle East and North Africa. And for the last 6 years, I've been the director of the Geneva office of the Cairo Institute. And so for that period of time, I've been able to work with large amounts of NGOs and civil society from that region on their engagement with the Universal Periodic Review. And so what I wanted to do this morning was just share maybe some of the insights that I've been able to accumulate over those years, and hopefully provide you with some interesting ways of looking at the Universal Periodic Review. Because the danger is that when we begin to speak about the United Nations, when we begin to speak about the UPR, it becomes a very technical exercise dominated by, how to draft a recommendation, how to submit your recommendations, how to, these types of technical questions can override the discussion. But I don't believe the UPR, that's really the strength of the UPR, is in the technicalities of it. The truth is, I believe the strength of the UPR is in the creativity of civil society and how to use it creatively in your own context and in your own way to make it something that is worthwhile to engage in. And there's a couple ways to, a couple things that I think I've learned that helps to make the UPR a meaningful experience for civil society actors or anybody who wants to engage on the UPR from various countries. And so one of the first things that I would say is that the UPR should not be seen as disassociated or external to what you're already working on. So if you are working on, getting a law reformed on torture in your country, or attempting to apply pressure to a certain minister or certain ministry within your government, the UPR should not be seen as some sort of technical exercise outside of those efforts by which you get the international community to make some technical recommendations. I don't believe that that should be the primary way to look at it. I think that you should see it as, how can I use this particular tool to get that, what I've already been working on? And the UPR is nice, right? Because unlike other, it separates itself in certain ways. One, all countries are reviewed, right? So your country will be coming up and it will be a very scheduled thing, so you know when it's coming, and you can make long-term plans of how to use it to bring visibility to your issue, to bring media attention to your issue, to put particular policy makers on a national level in the spotlight, and to raise awareness among states and NGOs throughout the world of your particular struggle. And I really believe that that is the way you should begin to think about it. So when you say to yourself, okay, I think our organization or myself, I'd like to engage with the UPR, then you really have to look at it through the lens of what you're already doing, and not through the lens of how can I get the technical recommendations I want. That's important to do as a tool, because the recommendations that the states put forward during the UPR can be used again by you once they're made. And they can be used again to create pressure, to create visibility, and create some form of leverage over policymakers. But the recommendations in themselves, if they're just made and left there, they echo in the chamber of the United Nations. They will be of little use to you and probably won't get you much at all. And all the effort that you put into that process will be kind of useless. So you really have to have a strategy that looks at how to use the UPR within your existing strategies as civil society, and not simply to get recommendations, but to build a campaign. And it's a good tool to build a campaign around. And if you can build a strong campaign around it, then people who don't necessarily pay attention to your concerns usually will have to pay attention to your concerns for a while at least, because it's in a formal process that everyone has to pay attention to, and everyone has to participate in some way or form in. And media national media or international media, who oftentimes say, that's not really an issue we deal with. What, that country? That country's not really selling papers, or there's not enough, destruction and carnage happening there to really get that on the newspaper. Well, they will actually pay attention if you frame it correctly and say, this country is being put in the spotlight, and the underlying repressive policies of this country is being dealt with finally. These types of catchphrases and ways of really getting visibility on your issues. And so that's one way I urge you to look at the UPR. Another way, I think another thing that I've learned is that the most effective UPR campaigns have been waged together, that civil society from a particular country actually comes together and does something around it. Because one NGO can get, one paper or one newspaper or one or two countries to pay attention to the issues. But if you are able to create a national network of NGOs that work and campaign on the UPR together on this unique moment where your country comes up for review, then suddenly it becomes a collective voice that everyone pays attention to even more. And there's lots of examples I can give you of national coalitions and networks forming around the UPR and getting unexpected, actually, concessions from their governments that they did not even think they would get. But because the government in that moment in time feels very, very scrutinized, and particular policymakers feel very scrutinized, so then they might drop a law that they wanted to put forward that would criminalize human rights work in some way or form. They might, release prisoners, a couple prisoners. They might ratify a treaty, an international treaty. And when they do that, then you can use that treaty body as well to see as a point of leverage and a point of visibility. And so the networks, working together as a network on a national level, if possible, sometimes it's not, but if possible, has the ability to multiply your effect as an individual NGO, and has the ability to multiply the visibility you get. And maybe this has already been covered before, so I apologize if I'm repeating, but I'm just letting you know some of the things that I've seen. And then maybe another thing that I've learned is that the UPR can and should always be adopted to the context in which you operate. And what I mean by that is there's some countries that you can actually engage with on a national level and really make progress on particular laws or policies with particular policy makers and really make a constructive effort out of it and get some good reforms or get a ask that you've been trying to get for a while, but because you used the UPR and raised the bar a little bit, you were finally able to get it because maybe there are some policymakers that are really constructive. They don't view NGOs as enemies. They are maybe even from the civil society background, who knows? But there's a lot of different countries in which that can happen. I would say Tunisia is in part, has become that type of country to some degree. And then there are other countries where it's almost absurd to think about engaging on a national level with national policymakers on fundamental issues that you work on. Because they've maybe jailed your colleagues, or they've outlawed your organization and other human rights organizations, or they've, shown no respect for civil society's role in policy making whatsoever, and they just completely ignore you. Those are two different, very different contexts. And the UPR can be used in both of them, but they are used differently in both of them. So if I was working on Tunisian UPR, I would say that the national process at this moment in time is very important. It's not perfect, but there are those in the government who can listen and will listen and has shown will to reform. If I'm engaging at this moment on Saudi Arabia, I'm probably not going to be using that for a long internal debate with policymakers on the national level with a lot of the issues of human rights, because they have shown very little will to really do that and have imprisoned most human rights defenders. So on the issue of Saudi Arabia, if you're working on that type of country, really it becomes more about building international pressure and building international pressure to make a concession on something. So don't, execute this one person, or don't, or release this person from prison because it's going to cause you a headache, basically, because you're coming under review. Or don't pass this particular law. You might be able to get that. But largely you have to build an international pressure to get that, because maybe your position on a national level is so marginalized. And so you have to think about that, and how you can use the UPR best in your context. And I know it seems, I'm basically saying very, very simple things, but there's a lot of times where I've seen people get caught up so much in the technical processes of the UPR that they forget to make it just another campaign. And it really should be used as another campaign, I think, for most civil society. So those are three things that I think, three elements that I've seen always that have helped create really strong universal periodic review campaigns. So one, integrating it into your already existing priorities, and so that you can actually use it in a way that gets you what you want. Two, working whenever possible jointly with others on a national level. And three, adopting how you're going to use it, what strategies you are going to use to what you believe is correct in the context of your particular country and government. So those are three things. I believe that Yves had told me that civil society representatives from Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Mauritania were here today. And so I think that each of those country situations are very different. However, I believe, there's probably more room to really form a national coalition of NGOs that can work in a very detailed level on specific policies on a national level in Tunisia and Morocco, probably. And maybe that's the case with Algeria and Mauritania. I'm not sure. But I do know that at least with Morocco and Tunisia, I believe that the UPR process, when forming national sort of action strategy, does present another unique opportunity for NGOs and for civil society, because it is one of the only United Nations review mechanisms that specifically and directly requires the government to consult with civil society on the national level, and requires that civil society to be a part of any process that goes forward. I also want to give you a couple sort of examples of some of the types of campaigns that I've seen used by human rights organizations and others during the UPR. And maybe that might provide you with some ideas about how you want to wage your campaign, if you want to wage a human rights campaign around the UPR. And so one of them is releasing a joint national report among civil society, and formulation of a national coalition around and agreeing to priorities that will then translate into how you want to engage on the UPR. And using those common objectives to produce a joint national civil society report on specific issues that you believe as an individual organization or as a collective group that the international community should specifically create recommendations on, and to formulate those recommendations, but then to include analyses within that report on how specific issues are being violated, specific human rights issues are being violated, and then using that report well in advance of the actual UPR itself, of the review itself, to release a national report and bring in both national and international actors to say that these are the collective demands of civil society in the country, and this should be the priority of the international community and the priority of national policymakers, and having, say, a UPR launching party or a UPR launching press release or press conference among national civil society, if possible, in your country. And really drawing attention to issues of concern and not necessarily to the recommendations you want to see. And there was, in the context of Egypt, there was a campaign launched. It was 6 months before the actual review of Egypt, and it focused largely on a set of maybe 5 or 6 different policies and laws. And there was a huge press conference by Egyptian NGOs 6 months before the review even happened. The hook for the media on the national level was, this is going to be Egypt's time to prove that it has made progress, or to prove that it's committed to these issues, and Egypt in particular will be under questioning by the international community for these issues. And after that initial launch, they had a monitoring mechanism by which they engaged and sent out invitations to the government to engage them as they are required to do. And whenever the government would refuse that engagement, they would publicize it. And they would say, you know, already we can see that the Egyptian government, or / insert your government, is not engaging with civil society as required when they entered on the UPR process. Already we can start seeing this lack of engagement. And then you can maybe use that sort of pressure to actually get them to engage with you. Open doors maybe that has never been opened for you to before on the national level. I know I've seen high-ranking ministers in governments meet and actually begin a discussion with civil society that never would have done it before, whenever you can use the UPR as a campaign tool. Because they know that then that minister probably will have to travel to Geneva and will be in front of the entire United Nations answering questions about that issue, and about whether or not they actually engaged with civil society and whether or not they actually engaged in the process as required on the national level. And another tool that I've seen that has worked really well has been calling for the release of a national action plan by the government under review to implement those recommendations that it has committed itself to, and to demonstrate, and if it says that it doesn't accept that recommendation because it is already implementing it, so then you can say, all right, well, you're implementing it, so that's part of our action plan for you to demonstrate how you're implementing it. And that action plan that you call for on a national level has the ability to use the momentum created during the UPR review and extend that momentum and that attention on your country for, months afterwards. And if the country refuses to create an action plan, that's okay, because civil society can create that action plan as well. And you can hold the government to account for the steps that you've identified as civil society that have to be implemented to accomplish the obligations it has agreed to, or that it has said that it will be doing. And again, it's just a tool. It's not there's none of us that are so naive that we think because a recommendation was made during the UPR, the government is, okay, we'll do it, definitely. And, this is not how the UPR works. We all know that. That's not how the world works. How the world works is the longer you can sustain pressure and visibility on a particular issue, or the longer that you can engage with a policymaker and sort of give them a bit of a headache, the more chance you have of getting something from them. whether it's your initial ask or something maybe below that, but something from them, some sort of concession that will then open the door to more. And so the action plan works really, really well that way. And I've seen it used in multiple contexts, both in countries where constructive national engagement with the government is really good, and in contexts where the government, that sort of constructive national engagement is not necessarily possible at that time. So that's another tool that I've seen that's worked really well. And then I just want to talk to you quickly about some of the maybe benefits that the UPR engagement can provide you as civil society that might not even be something that you were intending to get. And one of those is that the UPR, because of its international character, because it's held at this big United Nations body, so people pay attention to it more, etc. It can actually help you to create and expand your network and your influence as a particular individual or organization. How do you do that, and how does that happen? There will be a lot of international NGOs looking toward your organization or toward national actors for guidance on what is happening in the country and what you believe is the most pressing issues. There will be a host of countries who want to engage on your country's UPR, but have very little idea about what is the most pressing issues in your country, what is actually happening in your country. And there will be a host of media organizations that might want to cover the UPR of your country, but are looking for credible information that they can use to write a story. So you will suddenly have clientele as civil society that are looking towards you to provide information and to help to guide the process and give them insight into what's happening. And you can use that new found clientele to start building a long-term relationship with them, or to engage with them and actually get contacts that you never thought you would get. You can travel to the capitals of countries and get meetings with high-level, maybe people within the governments of countries around the world that are looking for insight so they can feed into the UPR process. You can engage with ambassadors or high-ranking diplomats in your own country from around the world who are, again, looking for information, looking for how to engage. And so all of this translates into your ability to really, if you're prepared and you're well prepared for it, and you have a very strong information, strongly worded, accessible recommendations addressing specific issues, then you can really use that preparation to really expand your influence and to engage with a large network of global actors that you can then use for anything afterwards. You can use those networks and those connections for a different campaign that you're working on. And so it does provide you also with benefits if you're prepared and you go into the process with a strong preparation and background and really understand how to engage in the process. So having said all that, what I would hope is that if there's any questions or comments, small, big, If you want my point of view or an NGO point of view on any particular aspect of the UPR, please feel free to ask me, and I will do my best to answer any questions. So thank you.